This is Lead Speak, the podcast for school-based speech-language pathologists where we shine a light on leadership, the kind that helps teams thrive and students succeed. Our guests are redefining what it means to lead by expanding the skills and the mindsets SLPs need to inspire change through today's challenges and into tomorrow's possibilities. Because leadership isn't about your title, it's about your impact. Whether you're guiding a team or leading from your therapy room, you deserve the tools, clarity, and inspiration to lead with confidence and heart. We are Judy Rich and Natalie Lebrun, and this is Lead Speak. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Lead Speak. If you've been listening with us all season 3, thank you. We love having this space with you to think big, reflect deeply, and grow as school-based speech-language pathology leaders.
And if you're new here, welcome. We're so glad you found us. If someone shared this episode with you, it probably means they see you as a leader, someone who's ready to influence change, elevate others, and make things better from wherever you are.
Before we dive into today's episode, just a quick reminder. If you're enjoying this podcast, don't forget to follow, like, or share this episode with a colleague or a teammate. It's one of the best ways to grow this community and to keep these important conversations moving forward.
This season, we've been talking about culture by design, how great teams and systems don't just happen, they're intentionally and strategically built. And today's guest, she's been doing that kind of work in classrooms, universities, and national leadership spaces.
We are thrilled to welcome Megan-Brette Hamilton to the podcast. She's an SLP, a qualitative researcher, a former professor, and currently serves as ASHA's Chief Staff Officer for Multicultural Affairs. And throughout all her roles, she's been helping people understand people.
In this episode, you'll hear about how Megan-Brette used strategies like ethnographic interviewing, desk visits, and plain language communication to build rapport, create buy-in, and repair fractured teams, long before she ever had a formal leadership title.
We'll also explore how evaluations can help families see their children more clearly, how interprofessional collaboration can make generalization seem seamless for students, and why understanding the difference between purpose and goal might just shift how you show up at work.
This episode is full of insight, humor, and practical tools. So let's get into it. Here is our conversation with Dr. Megan-Brette Hamilton. Well, hey, Megan-Brette, welcome to our podcast.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. I'm excited.
We are too. We can't wait to dig into this stuff. Listen, you've had a very diverse career, and you've been an SLP in schools, you've been a professor, you've been a podcast host. In fact, you sort of told us how to do a podcast. You've been a speaker, and now you're Chief Staff Officer for Multicultural Affairs for ASHA. Talk to us about your SLP journey, your story as an SLP, and whether or not there have been any common threads that tie things together from one thing to the next thing to the next thing.
I can do this in a concise amount of time. So I started out, I got my undergraduate degree at Hampton University, an HBCU, historically Black college and university. And then I went to get my master's at University of Maryland. So here's the thing. I always knew that part. I always knew I was going to be a speech-language pathologist. Okay, I lie. 3 months into college, I always knew. I was originally a broadcast journalist major. So that was kind of like always, I knew I was going to do that. Speech-language pathologist. I loved it. Once I found it, I didn't look back. And I also knew I was going to work in schools. I don't know. I've always tutored my whole life. I've tutored students, kids on math and everything. So I knew I wanted to work with kids. So I ended up moving to New York and working as a school-based SLP for 10 years, an entire decade. And I do think something about myself I've learned over the years is that I get, I don't even want to say the word bored because I don't think it's bored. I think I figure out the job and then I look at what's next. right? So I'm a school-based SLP. I'm in New York. I'm loving it. I'm an independent contractor. So I was not employed at any one school. I was employed with a contract company. And I loved it that way because I also did acting. I hosted a show on cable and Brooklyn Cable. So I was able to kind of flex around my time a bit. Worked with K through 12. My absolute favorite group were the seventh graders. I know how they are. I can hear people saying things, but I absolutely love seventh graders. So I just think towards the year 8, year 9 of my career, I got it. I could always get better. Everyone can always learn more, but I'd figure it out, right? I was like, okay, this is what my job looks like. This is how I work with kids. I try and help them figure out how their brain works, how they access language, how they access information. And I share that information with families and teachers. Like I figured that out. So then I had questions like, what is really a language disorder? What is it? And do all my kids have language disorders? What if they just access language differently? What if they just process it differently? So I was just having all these questions and I was like, oh, I'm going back to school. So then I went back to get my PhD, and I was going to get my PhD in cognitive neuroscience. I wanted to understand the brain better. I wanted to understand how we process language and what does that actually mean for a language disorder. But I get there, and for whatever reason, race came up a lot in my conversations. And most of my students, K through 12, they were probably identified as Black or African-American and Hispanic. So I was used to talking about, maybe like, my Black boys or talking about my students, and then my Spanish speaking students. And I don't know, somehow I think some of that conversation made people uncomfortable. And it led me down a different path in my research. It led me down cultural linguistic diversity. It led me down culturally responsive practices, and particularly African-American English. So that's where my research ended up. And after that, getting my PhD, I didn't really know what to do next. And I ended up becoming a professor at Auburn University, where I taught child and adolescent language disorders. I was a qualitative researcher. I love qualitative research. I love it. I love numbers. I love math. All of those things are still true, but I love to understand the story behind the numbers. I need to, and I don't always trust the number. I don't trust how people got the number, right? So I wanted to make sure that I was answering those questions for myself. So ended up doing that, worked at Auburn University for 6 years. And again, I'm kind of like getting to that point where I'm like, what's next? I'd had my podcast. I kind of figured out this is the kind of person, this is the kind of professor I was going to be, right? I'd figured that out. Like, not really like the regular academic professors. And I say that in positive ways for both ends. But I was a little different, and I wasn't going to get an R01. That wasn't who I was. That wasn't the kind of researcher I was. And I was fine with that. And once I was kind of like, let me try and get tenure and figure out what's next. But then Chief Staff Officer for Multicultural Affairs, that job opened up. Didn't think that was going to open up anytime soon, since Vicki Deal Williams had the job for 25 years. I applied for the job. I was encouraged to apply. I applied, and then I got it. When I think about my trajectory, when I think about how I've stayed in the field of communication sciences and disorders, but I've hit it at different angles, right? Hit it in different ways. And I've worked with K through 12, and I've worked with undergrads, and I've worked with graduate students. And when I work with graduate students and undergrads, I help them learn how to take my tests. I help them learn how to study. I help them learn how to apply the material. And now here I am at ASHA, and it's been interesting, not only just working with people, working with my colleagues, but also the work I do with members. And I think the thread is communication. I know that sounds crazy, but I really do. I think I try my best to help people understand people. That is what I try to do. I tried in my 10 years in Brooklyn. I even had a business card said, helping kids to help themselves, right? I tried really hard to get people to understand, well, this is probably why they did this. This might be the perspective that you're missing. This might be, what they're thinking of, because I do a pretty good job of understanding people. I don't always agree, but I can understand, and then I can tell somebody else that information. So that's what I think the thread is. I think the thread is I've always tried to do my best to help people understand people, because the way I communicate to others feels usually very plain language like, and people understand that. I don't use a lot of big words. Don't use a lot of multisyllabic words. Never have. Wasn't that kind of professor. So I think that's the thread.
Just curious, what did you teach?
I taught child and adolescent language disorders for undergrads. I also taught the intro course. For graduate students, I taught clinical problem solving 1 and 2. So that was for the preschool age children and also school age children. And then my baby, I designed a course before I left, an online course called Communication Disorders in Society. And it was my absolute favorite course because I got to do what I was trying to get people to do all along. Anyone could take it. You could be a poli-sci major. You could be a physical therapy major. You could be a marketing major. Everyone and anyone could take that class and they got something from it because our field relates to everything. I am very biased about our field. I just always have been. It relates to everything. So I designed this class so anyone can take it, and anyone did take it, and it's still there, and they seem to love it. So I'm glad.
That seems to make a lot of sense with like what you just told us about how your thread is communication. Like it really sounds like you're the type of person, like you're almost like an interpreter, right? Mm-hmm. Like you take in, you like absorb all this knowledge and wisdom from people, you process it through your lens, and then you're able to speak in a way that is accessible to all, whether you are coming from an SLP discipline or not.
I appreciate that. I think, I don't have a lot of gifts, but I have learned, a lot of the presentations I gave were to librarians, right? I've worked with people who are incarcerated. I've worked with community liaisons. These are the audiences I've spoken to about communication because it's relative to everyone. And then I think, you figure out who's in the room and you adjust your message for them so that they can see themselves in the message.
So how do you see, so let's take that idea and kind of like overlay it in school systems, right? Mm-hmm. So how do you see the role of an SLP who manages a caseload and also an SLP who manages a team as far as really tapping into those opportunities in a multidisciplinary environment, right? Where you get to influence others and really kind of support each other to make the kids be better at the end.
Yeah, I think, again, it's interesting about messaging, right? And language and communication. I think you always have to know who's in the room, who's your audience, what's the purpose. You always have to know that. The way we write our reports, I always tell people, you need to write your report in a way that if you're not in the room, someone else can understand what you wrote, right? Because you can't, it's like, well, what I meant was, what that, okay, so I know, yeah, it says that, but what I meant was, no, you need to write your report so that whoever's reading it and you're not in the room can totally understand that. Now, oftentimes we use our own jargon in reports, and we get that. But when you are talking to a social worker or a school psychologist or an administrator or a parent, a caregiver of some sort, because communication really is something that people get, I try and couch it in that. When we start talking really nuancy about speech and language and the nuances of that, we lose people sometimes, right? Any of your morphemes, phonology, all of that, you lose people. But if you kind of make it and you zoom out and you make sure they understand, I'm working on da-da-da-da-da, and the purpose is for this communication aspect. The purpose is for this, for effective communication to happen with yourself and your child, or the child and the teacher, or the teacher and the other professional. So I think, when I was in those IEP rooms, I remember listening to a lot of the other professionals speak. And I remember I would try and make sure they understood the why I was there for that kid, right? I'm here for this kid, and I wouldn't use all those little words that I know no one else is going to understand, but I would say, some kind of practical goal, academic and or social, and relate it right back to that kid, right? Relate it right back to that very specific child. I think what happens sometimes is we go into rooms and we want to just speak with our own jargon, and we assume that someone might understand or not. But you can't even do that unless you even aligned people's thought bubbles. I always talk about aligning thought bubbles. Like, we're all in this room to talk about this kid right now and trying to make sure that he's going to do, be the best he can, or she or they, in an academic setting, the best they can in their social world. So let's start talking about communication. What are the gaps? What are the challenges? What are the ways that we can assist? What are the opportunities? And let's all get on the same page and talk from there with their own lenses, right? And that's the whole reason everyone's in that room, because I don't know everything at all. Teachers don't know everything. Administrator doesn't. So we're all together. We can create this lovely puzzle and hopefully work together to support this child.
I was on an autism assessment team many decades ago, and it was just one of the richest experiences of my life. First of all, I thrive in teamwork, and we were basically the same team for a decade. And week in and week out, we were testing for autism back when autism was relatively a fresher, newer thing. And there wasn't a week that went by in this teaming environment that I didn't learn something about autism, that I didn't learn something about families, that I didn't learn something about myself as an SLP, that I didn't learn something about myself as a person. But being the SLP on the team, I also had the great responsibility of pulling the reports together. So I was the main report writer, and then everybody would do their piece, and I had to pull it together. It was just part of the job. So what I always enjoyed and talk about a lot is that if a parent can recognize their own child in the report, you've written a good report.
I like that.
So I would call the parents after they got their reports, because there was a lag between testing and delivering the report. Call and say, did you understand it? Is this what we talked about? And I just love the times when they said, yes, I recognized him in your report. And I was just, so great. So great.
I love that, Judy. I love how you worded that too. Yeah, I remember we would have those meetings, and I just remember this one time. Sorry, so now you're going to make me go down memory lane. An IEP meeting was over, and I was walking out, and the parents said, they called me Miss Megan. Miss Megan, can you come over here? I'm like, yes. He said, thank you. And I said, okay. He said, you see my child. You see him. Thank you. He's like, and I noticed it, and I cried, because whatever that was, I'm glad he saw that, because that's what you want. Like, of course I see your child, right? Of course I do. I know the nuances. I know their hobbies. I know their habits. I know their challenges and all of those things. But it felt really good that exactly what you said, like, yes, I see that they're not a copy and paste, right? That your child is not a copy and paste to me. Your child is actually someone who I've been working with very, very closely for a long time about really important things.
Okay, so this is so great. Talking about recognizing the people that we're interacting with, recognizing who's in the room, what they need, and then communicating. I did love when you said, Megan-Brette, align the thought bubbles when you're in a multidisciplinary setting. That's great. But that's not what I want to talk about right now. What I want to talk about right now is to hear a little bit about your passion for seventh graders. So start talking about one of your go-to ways to convince students or to engage with students about how your speech language therapy time benefits them. How'd you get buy-in?
Okay. Ooh, the buy-in. Yes. Okay. So anyone who's worked in K through 12 knows, okay, and granted, I did this a long time ago, so who knows with this technology age if it still works. The younger kids, you can do the stickers, right? You can do stickers, you can do prizes. Those are the younger kids. Usually that worked. It was fine. Older kids, not so much. I realized a few things. One, I was a speech language pathologist in the school. I also didn't have much power as far as, and this was me, I don't know about anyone else, like consequences, right? Like if you didn't come, I couldn't give you detention. If you didn't come, I couldn't mark you down in your grading, right? It was like a weird kind of relationship that I had to figure out, like, okay, so where's my pull? Like, where's my pull for them? They don't come. And so one of the things I realized was I really had that rapport. I know it sounds very cliche, that rapport from day one has to be strong. Like I had to let them know that I am here because we are going to do this together. I made it a partnership, because if I make it a part, because by 7th grade, you know, they're kind of feeling themselves. So I tried to make sure they realized that we were doing this thing together. I also tried to make them realize what it was that was hard for them, because sometimes they, you know, people, especially kids, teenagers, they don't want to admit anything's hard. I actually never really use the word hard. I usually use tricky, but I would do a lot of pushing. I would watch, I would observe. Then I can see, because I don't, you know, the reports in New York City, someone else wrote the goals, right? So I would kind of verify the goals, right? So let me go observe. Let me go see if this is actually what I should be working on, because I'm not really sure. Let me watch them in different settings, watch them in different classes, and then let's see. Because if I could really find and pinpoint that challenge that was for them, then that's the buy-in. They're like, oh, shoot, you noticed that? You saw that? I saw that. Great example. I had this one student, and the goal was written, you know, something about repeating sentences of increasing length, right? So he's going to repeat like 8 to 12 word sentences. And I was like, why are we doing that? Why are we repeating? I wasn't sure, and I hadn't really seen it. And so I started to do a lot more pushing with him. And I noticed there was this social component with his language piece. So he would laugh at the wrong times. People would look at him. He wouldn't laugh and everybody else laughed, right? He just wasn't kind of getting it. It was like his thinking was off in the classroom. And so I pulled him for a one-on-one once, and I said, sweetie, I think your ears are tricking you. Like, I don't think you're hearing what you think you're hearing. And he was like, what are you talking about? So I tried to give him some examples about what I thought was happening, and then that's something we could work on. So then I remember I pulled him once in a group. We're working on a science project, and someone said something. He cracks up laughing. Nobody does anything. All the rest of the kids are looking at him. He looks at me. He goes, Ms. Megan. I said, yes, sweetie. He goes, was that one of those times? I said, that was one of those times. He said, got it. He needed to understand why he was there and what I could do to help and how we could do this together. I said, once you and I can do this together, once we, and the way I talked about it, because by 7th grade, more than likely, you're not getting like our TIC kids. So by 7th grade, I would say, we're here to figure out how your brain works. I said, you have an amazing brain, but I'm not sure you know how it works. I don't know how it works. Let's figure out how it works. Figure out how it works. Because once we can do that, then we can let your teachers know what you need. You can tell me what you need. You can start telling your teachers what you need. Let's figure this out, you know, and just try and make sure you can actually see where those gaps were. Because if you're working on goals that they have no connection to, you're like, why are you working on this? I'm fine. I don't need help with that. You know what I need help with? Making a friend, right? You know what I need help with? Making people laugh at my jokes. You know, so trying to really see what is going to get them to realize there is a benefit, that there is a benefit to coming to me, and there's a partnership here. Because at this point in time, they're a 7th grader. Oftentimes they don't feel so intelligent coming to you. So you want to make sure they know from jump, like, ain't got nothing to do with your intelligence. And I tell people all the time, I've never met a kid who wasn't smart, ever. And if you can't figure out their intelligence, that's on you. So I would tell my kids, no, we're going to figure out the way you work. We're going to figure this out. We're going to figure out your intelligence. And this same kid, amazing rhythm person. He could hear a beat on a drum and repeat it in 2 seconds. Like he was just, he had, so, and then you pull from that strength. You pull from that. I played basketball so much for a lot of my kids because that's what they were good at. And so we incorporated some of our goals by playing basketball, right? Following directions. You figure out their strengths and you go through their strengths to help with what's the challenge.
Okay.
Because if you keep hitting on the challenge, then they don't want to come to you anymore. Like if they come to you every time and all you're doing is hitting on the thing that they're bad at, why would you want to go? Why would you want to go to a session? And every time it's just like, let's work on all the things that are hard for you again.
Well, that's the way I feel about students of all ages who are who have language disorder, who are not getting working on the right things. School is all about language and literacy and reading. And so it's a beat down if you can't do it. I just, my heart is heavy for children with language disorders who don't get the right intervention or a chance to work on the right thing through their strengths. Oh my goodness. Okay, so I heard you say a couple of things. I heard you talk about rapport from day one. And all of these things, by the way, that I heard you say relate to building culture. So I'm going to flip it from what you said about seventh graders to see if you can also parlay it over to your current team of grown-ups. I don't know how big your team is and all of that, but you can tell us. Okay, you talked about rapport from day one. You talked about this is a partnership. Implicit in all of that, you talked about maintaining trust and dependability, right? What else? And you talked about we're going to figure it out. Okay, you talked about those things: rapport, partnership, trust, connections. We're going to figure it out. Do you use those same approaches for building the culture on your current team, or is that a little too easy to say, hard to do?
Yes and yes. Yes, yes. Yes, I do think that is what I do, and also really important because I don't want to make it sound so simplistic. People are people, because it's not that simplistic. Context matters. There's complexity in people and relationships and all of that, and we know that. The purpose that I'm working with my colleagues now is different than the purpose I had working with seventh graders, obviously. But the goal could still be the same. That makes sense. I'm going to be a nuance here between purpose and goal. The goal could still be, we're trying to figure this out, right? We got problems to solve. We got solutions to find. And in order to do that, to do this together, I do need to trust you. And I want you to trust me. And I do need to have a strong relationship with you. It doesn't have to be the best relationship, but at least let's respect each other and let's understand, what we each are bringing to the table. I think that's one of the most important things to understand. I think not only having that rapport, which is huge from jump. Actually, when I first started my job at ASHA, I did these things called desk visits, where I just had 15-minute visits with the 40 people that worked under me, so I could just learn about them. I think some of them were like, oh, let me go ahead and get ready and tell her what I do. I'm like, I'm not here. I don't care what you do. I'm here to find out. I mean, I do care what you do, but I'm here to find out, what do you like to do? How long you been in ASHA? You got a dog, you got a cat, like that was my desk visits. I did that for the first, 2 months. And I actually just did it again recently because I've been there 3 years now and I don't see people that often. So I did another kind of desk visit, just making sure you keep that rapport going, making sure people know that I'm still here if you need me, right? This connection is still here. It didn't fade away. It's still here. But I think what's so important when it comes to working with other people in any kind of respect. So you can work with the seventh graders, but also with working with your colleagues. Everyone in that room brings something very valuable to the table. Everyone. And maybe people are having different roles, and that's fine. Respect the roles, but respect the perspective, the experience, the background that people are bringing to that table, because there might be one problem we're trying to solve, one solution we're trying to have. And the only way we can get to it is if we are aware of everyone, what everyone is bringing to the table, what everyone's background is, what everyone's perspective is, because it's not the same and it shouldn't be the same. And actually, you said this earlier, Judy, I love working in the team. I said that the other day. I was like, I really like this team thing. And I did it in Brooklyn for a little bit, but not to this extent. I really like coming to the table, and you have to have I don't know the right word here. You have to have a sense of self to know that you are not supposed to be the only one with the answer here. You are here to provide your input, give what you can, share your back. Someone says something, you say, oh, that's a good idea. I didn't think about that. Someone says something, but no, that's not true because think about this. Oh, you're right. I didn't think about that. Right. You just bring it. And then together you come up with some hopefully lovely solution. And something else I want to make people understand. It's a solution. It may not be the solution. It might be the correct one, the right one, the whatever, but it's iteration 1.0. And if you can come up with iteration 1.0, then you do the whole quote unquote scientific method. You go through it, right? If you want to do that, if you want to think about it that way. And then you say, okay, this worked or this didn't work. And what are we going to change next time? Okay, actually, let's change this around. But I do love that team mentality of coming together and coming up with solutions based on the different perspectives everyone is bringing.
So can I take us down a notch just for a couple of minutes, right? I love equally teaming. I think that's where the birth of all great innovation comes from, right? It's bringing all those perspectives together, saying something out loud and then being like, oh, nope, that's not really how I thought about that thing, right? Like just having that sounding board, just a different perspective. But Megan-Brette, what happens when you are on a dysfunctional team? And, I've been in situations where as the leader, quote unquote, you get dropped into a dysfunctional team and people are looking at you like, fix all our problems because we're not communicating well. We don't trust each other. We have this little faction here that's doing this work here and this person by themselves, like, what do we do in that situation? How do we go about that?
That's tricky, Natalie. I think, look, okay, my students hate me. Context matters, right? Hey, it is going to matter. What role are you playing in that dysfunctional team, first of all, right? So if you're the leader, quote unquote, right? I do a lot of quotes here. I know that, but I don't always mean them. But let's say you are the leader, okay? And you do realize your team's not getting the goal done. Your team's not able to have the conversations and solve the problems. I think there is something to be said about root cause, right? People have talked about root cause before, right? You zoom out and you figure out what is going on. Like, why is it that we can't get this right? What is happening? What are the factors, the variables that are stopping us, that either we're getting stuck in our thinking. I don't say this to be negative, but egos are huge when it comes to kind of dysfunctions on a team, right? Sometimes people have their prior understanding and their identity is really attached to an idea or a project or something. And it's hard for them to let go of that, thinking that if that goes away, that's me that goes away, right? If we stop doing it that way, that's me that we are now invalidating, right? So I think trying to make, I've learned about this in different, kind of leadership things, trying to separate the issue from the person is one of the biggest things too, right? How can you separate? What is the issue here? What is the issue we're having? Oftentimes when I have those conversations in group settings, I try to make sure that if possible, depending upon what the issue is, I try to make sure I use titles, not names. Right? So sometimes if you start to use names and you get personal and, when so-and-so said this and so-and-so, okay, so, well, it sounds like the person in this department has concerns about blah, 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 or the person in this department has concerns, right? So sometimes, and again, context matters. Sometimes I think removing names from even the conversation can help, because it brings people, it zooms people out and makes you realize that we're talking about an issue here. We're talking about an issue. Perhaps this department and this department are not agreeing on something, and we need to realize why, because each person has a goal, each person has priorities, and maybe there is a tension between the priorities of the groups, of the departments, of the heads of something. But you start saying names, and I feel like the names will bring up more tension. The names will bring up the ego. The names will bring up but I'm connected to this project. And so if you're saying no to this project, you're saying no to me. So I don't know if I'm fully answering your question, but I do think, there are ways to try and get to the root cause. And some of those ways are to really look at the issues, not necessarily the people. And also, if you are one of the leaders on the team, have those conversations one-on-one with people. There's calling in versus calling out, and sometimes calling out in a big group setting does not lead to anything positive. So pull people aside and say, this is what I've noticed. You tell me, is there something that I'm missing? I feel like this is what I noticed in the conversations, or you're shutting down, or you appear to be, upset when we do this. talk to me about it. And you will be able to do that if you've established a strong rapport and trust and connection with that person before you even have to have these kinds of hard conversations.
Yeah, that 15-minute, that desk thing is magic, right? Because like inevitably you will have to have a difficult conversation with somebody, whether they're the part of their behavior, their choices is the root cause, right? Or not. And walking into that conversation when you already kind of know some of the non-work stuff, right? That might be showing up at work, God forbid, can lead to a very different approach to the conversation, can lead to very different vocabulary used in that conversation.
Exactly. And this actually feels too like when I talk about ethnographic interviewing for students, I try to tell clinicians, listen to the words that the caregivers are giving, listen to the words that the student has given you, and then you can use those words once they've used them, right? So don't say, so talk to me about the struggles you have, or talk to me about, your communication difficulties. You wait for them to say something about struggle. And then you go, can you describe what that looks like? Can you describe what struggle looks like? So to your point, what I'm agreeing with Natalie is, yeah, if you have someone in that room, you need to have that difficult conversation, make it an open-ended kind of broad beginning. And then you hear what they're saying. Like, well, I just think it's unfair that, talk to me about what felt unfair in that meeting then. Talk to me, but, don't put that out there, because if you put it out there, then they start to get defensive. And they're like, that's not what it was, and da-da-da. So if you listen first and listen to the vocabulary and the feelings that they're saying, then you can reflect that and say, okay, didn't realize that. Tell me a little bit more about why you felt you were defensive.
I think I have to put in a plug for the ability to take a counseling class in graduate school, right? Yes. Because everything you're talking about, Megan-Brette, to me just brings back that semester of counseling where you're using that power of like, wait until the word is said. Mm-hmm. And then learn more about what the word means to that person, right?
Exactly.
And that's a beautiful thing to your point, when you're working with students, you're doing an evaluation, you're talking with the teachers, the parents, whatever, to figure out like, what is the challenge? What is difficult? What's tricky, right? Mm-hmm. And then equally, you can apply that to your team. As you get to know them, you get to figure out like, what is it that really fires them up about their job in the most beautiful way? And what are some barriers that maybe you can help alleviate in the position that you're serving?
Yep.
So more counseling classes at the graduate level. Okay, thanks.
The hats we wear. Yes. My goodness. Yes.
And I also want to put a plug in for just use ethnographic interviews every time you open your mouth. This is not like a strategy that is, it is culturally responsive, but it's not only for people from cultures that are radically different than what the culture you come from, because we are too quick to make assumptions that we are the same or different than other people. And so I just want to put a plug in. All of you listeners out there, use ethnographic interview strategies with everybody.
I second, third, that, whatever number we're on, because I made sure all my graduate students did ethnographic interviewing. I think it was week 2, just so they got, understood it and were able to kind of use it throughout the rest of the semester. But I will put this out there. I loved it. I always provide kind of like sample prompts, talk to me about, what does a good day look like for you, right? Talk to me about what could be tricky for you. Talk to me about your, anything. But I asked some of my students at Auburn, I said, okay, so now you all come up with some prompts. Some prompts that you think you would, use with families and everything. And I'll never forget this one student, and I use it every time my presentations, said, I think a really good one to end on would be, tell me one thing you wish everyone knew about you. Or tell me one thing you wish everyone knew about Charlie. And I absolutely love that one. And I use it every time because you end it then on that note, right? You end it on that, I just wish everybody knew that Charlie's doing the best he can, right? Or I just wish everyone knew that I'm okay. I'm okay. Like everyone's so worried about me, like whatever that is, but I would love it. One of my graduate students, tell me one thing you wish everyone knew about, fill in the blank.
I love that. How that's a levitating question.
It is, right? I know every time I do, I'm like, oh, it's a great prompt.
Yeah. And then you give them power back, right? Especially like when you're doing like a interview for like assessment purposes or an interview for a job purpose or whatever the case may be. Like as the interviewer, you hold a lot of power in that dynamic, right? Like you set the tone, you set the questions, you set the pacing, But then if you finish your time together with this like super levitating question, in my head, it's like you give that power back because they get to now choose how they want to finish their interview. Is it to share a positive thing? Is it to share really something that's on their heart that they just haven't had a chance to speak on yet? That's great. Can I steal that? That's awesome.
Yeah, I'm telling whoever's listening to your podcast, I'm telling everyone, like, I love ethnographic interviewing. And if you do it well, they should feel the power through most of it. But that ending is a really great way. I mean, I was a qualitative researcher, right? And these are the things we did for semi-structured interviews. You ask these, it's not really you're asking questions, you're also providing prompts, right? You're providing prompts and then you probe. So what I loved about that is that student, she gave a really great one and I will never forget it. So I always use it.
Yeah, you can use it with parents too. What do you want everybody to know about your child that we don't know? Because everything.
You use it about teachers.
We forget to ask about personality. We're so focused on either the problem that we're trying to solve or the interpersonal dynamic on a professional interaction or an assessment. We're trying to identify a language disorder or a communication disorder. And we're so focused on the piece that we're trying to figure out that we forget about personalities and humor and what makes this human happy. What does this human like to joke about? Whether or not they have speech, what do they like to joke about? Can they tease you non-verbally? Of course they can, So I love that question.
Okay, so I want to ask you a little bit about interprofessional practice. So we've already kind of touched on it. So you have talked about how collaborating with other disciplines has been so helpful for you, right? When you were in the schools, now today you're working in a setting where truly you are working with people with different experiences and different training. So how has interprofessional practice helped you to like where you are today? And like, how has it shaped your career?
Ooh. That is it's a great question because I do love our field. I think it's shaped it in lots of different ways though. So if I look at my K through 12 life, right, my 10 years in Brooklyn, I worked really closely with, social workers, definitely social workers, because we usually had very similar kids on our caseload, right? We usually it was like a big old Venn diagram. What I loved about that is that, okay, we know how sessions go sometimes, right, with our lovely students, and sometimes they don't always go well behaviorally. And that I might have taken a class or something or understand a little bit about behavior and communication because all behavior, is communication, but I still don't have the expertise that perhaps a social worker would have, right? And so I remember this one social worker, actually, I was friends with all three of them. There's three of them at this one charter school I worked at. And they were really helpful in helping me understand not only what was happening with my children in the sessions, perhaps when the behavior issues were happening or the behavior challenges, but also what to do about it, right? And it was a really awesome exchange because then they would ask me, well, when he gets this way in our sessions, I don't know the ways to communicate with him. It's like he doesn't have the language for it. He doesn't have the words. So I was like, okay, well, this is what we're working on. So we're both literally helping each other out to help this child, right? It's like, so wait, what do you do? And it's not like I'm going to teach you how to be a social worker and I'm going to teach you how to be an SLP. It's I'm going to give you just enough information to help you make it through your session so that you can do this in a way. Here's something else I think is really important. When you do this interprofessional practice and education, it helps the students so much because it's not a variety of different messaging coming at them about the same thing. There could be a place for that, right? I've heard someone say, well, isn't it good that a student should know that in this context, someone's going to say this and it means this. And in this context, someone's going to say this and it means the same thing. And I need to know that. I'm like, yeah, I could get that, true. But there's a starting place for things. And I think what's so great is that when you have these conversations with the special education teacher, when you have these conversations with the social worker, even just with the general education teachers, the science teacher, the math teacher, you hear the vocabulary or the messaging or the language that they're using, and you can use that same language when you work with them so that it starts to generalize, it starts to marinate and solidify in the student. And they're like, that's what they're all meaning. Okay, got it. Versus having 15 different messages from 15 different adults telling you to do something. It can be very confusing at first. So I like that IPP piece because you learn from each other, you get enough information to do your job better. And in the end, it's all for the benefit of that student, right? It's all for that student to really kind of ease their own cognitive burden, right? Of trying to realize, okay, this communication came from this student person. And so it meant that, but over here, Miss Megan said that. So I should probably, but then over here, she's even academically speaking, I was I loved pushing in. So academically speaking, I would be able to do lots of things. Okay. Now I feel like I'm not even answering your question, Natalie, but I'm going to keep going because I don't even know where I went. I was like, wait, another thing. What I really liked about working with teachers, I loved working with teachers, was, again, not only getting that common vocabulary, that common language and understanding the curriculum, but it was working on, it wasn't like I was an add-on to this child's academic day. I was embedded in their day by working with the teachers, right? It was like I was just part of that. So sometimes I think you can have a kid and they're doing their thing and then you pull them out and then it's like this 30 minutes of like, oh, this is a little different. Okay, I'm doing speech and language right now. And then you put them back in the classroom and it's like, oh, here I go back in. But if you are knowledgeable about the curriculum and what's going on in that classroom and the lessons, the science project that's due, the social studies test that's on Friday, the spelling test that's happening, if you are knowledgeable of that, then this feels seamless for the student, right? You pull them out and you say, okay, so I heard Mr. Fox say that you're going to be working on the social studies project until, 2 weeks. Oh yeah. Well, let's say, and you're a savvy clinician and you think about the goals, you think about the curriculum, and you just embed it. So it should feel seamless for the child. So the child should be able to, the generalization is just there. You don't have to make it so effortful, right? Because we know that's almost the hardest part of what we do is to generalize from what we're doing over here in this 2x4 room to the rest of the world. But if you just use that IPP to talk to the teacher, what are you working on? What can I work on? Okay, so these are some of the goals. I actually worked with this one teacher, the ELA teacher, English Language Arts, 8th grader. She was reading The Hunger Games to her students. I did so much pushing. She finally knew what I did for a career. And she was like, Megan-Brette, could you read The Hunger Games to them? You just do a better job. And I'm like, I can read The Hunger Games. So here I am reading The Hunger Games and doing what you do. Asking the questions, having them visualize. Does everyone see in their head? Well, what's everyone? Okay, what color was? Okay, great. Now I'm going to ask this question. So what do you think is going to happen next? All the things that we do, but just in a different way. So now what happened? She saw that. So then I don't always have to be in the classroom to read The Hunger Games. Now she's going to do it and she's going to take it. Like you just learn from each other.
So not only are you making things seamless for the student, things make more sense, things are embedded, and just maximizing outcomes for the student. but you're also making some pretty incredible lifelong friends while you're doing IPP. Talk to us a little bit about your Tuesday night dinner group.
So this is a great segue. Way to go, Judy. So when I worked at this one school in Brooklyn, I ended up becoming very close with some of my colleagues. One was a special education teacher. One happened to be a teacher, but then she moved into the principal position. One was doing consulting, and another one was it's like not a reading specialist, but another kind of special education teacher. So there was a bunch of us, and we somehow became very close, working with a lot of the same students. They weren't there. Not all of us were there for a long time, but they were there for maybe 2 or 3 years together. We overlapped, and then they went on to other schools. But then I stayed, and the principal stayed, and then the 4 of us really stayed very close with each other. There's 5 of us, but 4 of us ended up doing this thing that we called Tuesday night dinner. Tuesday night dinner was every Tuesday night after school. We ended up going to this lovely Thai restaurant called Joya in Brooklyn, and we would just sit and talk and eat and perhaps drink a little bit. And we talked about just everything. Like, we talked about our students. We talked about what was hard. We talked about what was easy. We talked about what happened today. We talked about what we could do. It was from these Tuesday night dinners that, one, I got more confident in my skills as a speech language pathologist because I was understanding what other professionals needed from me, if that made sense. So it's like, oh, but it'd be so great if you guys could just, oh, I can do that. It'd be so great if the teachers in the classroom could understand how to do some of these speech and language tips. Oh, I can do that. I actually ended up like writing this book, a manual from all these kinds of conversations I was having. I was like, wait, I could just write a book. I was writing all these, kind of packets for teachers to use in the classroom to help their students. And I was like, well, I can just make this into like a big old manual. And that came from just those conversations and a boost to my confidence. And because here's the thing for me about being a speech language pathologist in the schools. What was difficult for me was I was usually the only one. So I'm like, well, hope I'm doing a good job. Can't really tell. Don't really know. Everyone's coming to me for all the questions and I'm answering the best I can. So, you could go to Facebook maybe and ask some friends and be like, anyone else, doing well with this kind of student? Or I remember voice students. I was like, I don't know what I'm doing with this voice kid. Somebody help me. But working with some of my colleagues in that way, it was helpful for them to be like, no, I've seen like the kid you've been seeing. Oh my gosh, he's doing so much better in the classroom. Or, oh my gosh, he's doing so much better in this. I'm like, okay, it's working. It's working because you can't always tell. You're just kind of like on this wheel and you're seeing your kids and you're doing the best you can. And you hope you're making some kind of progress. You hope you're making some kind of positive anything, but you don't always know. And so it was nice to kind of get some like feedback and just that conversation with them. And to this day, all of us are still in education. Okay, except for me, technically, this is true. I just said that. But 2 of them working at private schools. They've moved up in the world, principals, and just still have that same understanding of we all want the best for these students. We've just always been that way. We just want the best for these students. How do we make sure that they are getting the resources, getting what they need to learn how to be great readers, to learn how to be great communicators, to learn how to succeed in that classroom? That is not always easy for our students.
That made me think of like 2 things, right? So like the fact that you were going out, enjoying some delicious Thai food, and you had to practice that interpreting skill that you have, that translating skill that you have in a very kind of friendly, relaxed, non-structured environment. You probably got really, really good at translating those things because you were you're just giving it a shot and then looking at people in the face saying, did that hit? Like, did that resonate?
Did
that make sense? Like, if I use this word instead, like, would that make your eyes sparkle a little bit more? Or is it like still kind of like glossed over because you have no idea what it just said? Right.
Yeah. No, they were great feedback. You're right. They were great feedback and it was a great practice, place. And granted, they were educators. So I had a leg up because they already knew that. But still, I mean, that's the world I was living in. And yeah, it was really great to be able to use that plain language in a way that they understood what I did then.
Yeah.
Right? Because we all know this. Not everybody knows what we do. Not everyone understands what we do. We know this. So you have to find ways to explain it, demonstrate it, so that people are like, oh, that's what you do? I'm like, that's what I do.
And that skill set is so critical when you're then wearing the crown, right? Like you are wearing the crown and you're now the unofficial, very official representative of all things speech pathology for the campus, for your district, whatever. And now you have to talk to a finance person about staffing numbers. And the only point of reference that they have to speech therapy is, oh, I think I went to speech therapy when I was in first grade for ours. And then you have to like convince them to give you more staffing allocation. Like that's a huge hurdle to overcome. So that was the first thought that entered my brain. The second thought that entered my brain when you're talking about these dinner dates with your friends was the need to have that community. And I don't want to say that in a really like superficial way. What I mean by community is that oftentimes when you're in that leadership role, you are the only one, right? Like you're isolated. Maybe you've come from like being an SLP that carries a caseload amongst a team of like 5, 10, 20, 100 SLPs. And now you are sitting on the throne, right? And you can't share with them all the things, right? Because in some cases it's inappropriate. They also don't see you battling those dragons that have to do with admin stuff, right? And so like having the opportunity to go out to dinner and then people saying like, I saw you work on that thing and I think you did really great there, right? Like, or I saw you do this thing and I'm not sure if have you considered trying it this way, right? Like having that feedback kind of bubble, again, in an informal way where you're not like, agenda ready and all that kind of good stuff. What a tremendous space of learning and growth.
Yeah. No, it still is, absolutely wonderful. Again, I'm not in that education world anymore, but even, in academia, it was really helpful to, when I was in this, hopefully it was a certain way, but when I was working on my PhD, what I found so interesting is I was getting my PhD in communication sciences and disorders, but oh my goodness, I lived in sociology. Like I lived across campus in the sociology part, and I lived in educational policy for a little bit in education. I mean, that is what I was doing. I was gathering that information from those fields so that I can inform what we do in our field so much better. Like, I think it was interesting because, the qualitative research, we don't do that much in our field. We don't do as much qualitative research in our field that people do in sociology or education. And I needed that. I needed to have that information to inform what we are currently doing, within our field. And so that even kind of IPP in that way, and that kind of professional relationships was really helpful. I have friends who she got her PhD in like an evaluation and systems thinking, right? That is huge for what we do over here. I'm like, now in my career at ASHA, I am constantly doing systems thinking, right? And be able to pull back on and talk to someone and ask for information like, okay, so this is our field, and be able to do that plain language translating. Okay, I know you do this and you don't know what we do, so hold on. This is what we do. Please relate that and help me. Oh, yeah. Okay, well, got it. Now I understand, and so trying to get to the point where you can have those conversations with people across the professional educational realm is huge, right? Making sure that people can relate to you and understand what it is that you do, why you do it, I think is huge. You don't always have to have a whole bunch of speech language pathology friends. I didn't. Right? I had a lot of different friends just from a lot of different areas, and it informed what I did.
So Megan-Brette, so with every guest that comes on our podcast, we like to take a last few moments just to talk about things maybe outside of speech, right? Just to see what else is going on, just to get you to know you a little bit better. So first of all, can you share with us maybe like a book or a podcast or a song that you've just really been into recently?
Oh my goodness. Book or podcast or song?
Or TV show.
Oh,
I don't know if you're a TV person.
I am a TV person. Yes, I am all the things. Okay, so TV, Law and Order, SVU. I'm sorry. It's just who I am. Mariska Hargitay. I don't, and it's funny because there's a formula to the show. It's an obvious formula. They've adapted it as time has gone on over the 20 something plus years. And so I know the formula, you know what's going to happen, but I still love it. So I will continue to be a Law and Order SVU person until they're done with it.
That. Do you know how many seasons they've been
I
on?
don't
Like,
know.
I feel
She
like
has been Olivia Benson probably for 25 years now. I always laugh. I'm like, Mariska, do you realize you're actually Mariska and Olivia? It's a little weird, but it is what it is. So yeah, I've been watching that. And then podcasts, I don't know. I'm listening to different ones. There's this one that's called How to Look and Sound Like a Leader. And I found it randomly on a car ride. And what I loved about it is the man is an actor. And you can tell the way he does the podcast, it cracks me up because I also did acting, right? Like I was an actress. And so I'm listening to the podcast. I'm like, why is this host a little different? And so I looked at his background. He's completely this actor from a long time ago, but it's a good podcast. It really is. So it's like how to look and sound like a leader. And it's got very tangible takeaways.
Oh, I'm going to have to look that up because some days that's what I need.
Yeah.
I love it. So what is a skill or a hobby that makes you a better clinician that you have?
Oh, skill or hobby that makes me a better clinician. I will say, first I was going to say being a mother. But speaking French has been helpful.
Tu parles français?
Oui, je parle français. Tu parles français aussi?
Ben oui, je suis canadienne.
Oh, mon Dieu. Okay, that's probably all I got, so don't you go further.
Oh, okay. I'll stop there.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's good. I need to practice. I haven't practiced in a very long time, but the fact that I even have it helps the communication piece, right? Helps.
Yes.
And to be perfectly honest, helps the cognition piece.
Oh, yes, it does. Research.
Right? Like I feel as though I can understand when someone, where you're working with someone and there is that delineation between cognition and language, right? Because for French, my language isn't so great in French, but my cognition, I can't correlate the two, right? And so when you're listening to someone, you're like, oh, okay, so I know the cognition is there. Right now, the language piece is getting in the way. So how can we help on that language piece? Or I know the language piece is there. This feels like a cognition thing, so just speaking another language has helped.
Okay, so now I have to ask, how did you learn French?
The typical U.S. way, 7th grade, right?
I mean, that's pretty good for 7th grade.
Well, 7th grade, and then I kept taking it all through high school. And then I was a little random and I took it again in college, freshman year. And then I studied abroad in Ken my junior year of college. And then I dated guys who speak French, and you just try and do things to keep it up. So
you have to. Yeah. As a person living in Houston, Texas, I can tell you that there's not too many opportunities to practice the French.
Yeah, it's not easy. It's not easy.
That's so cool. Oh my gosh. Okay.
And what's helped too, because of that, I do love language. So I have learned along the way random things. Like I've learned a little bit of Swedish. I've learned a little bit of Korean, and a little bit of Spanish. So funny, weird story. I was learning Korean because I was dating someone who's from South Korea. We were having a conversation. He was talking about the Baltimore Ravens. But because I was learning Korean, I had realized that there was that r sound. Mm-hmm. I don't know if anyone ever told him it. And I said, you know what? You know how you say it? I think it was blue. I said, you know how you say blue in Korean? He was like, and he said the word blue. I said, that first sound, that's the first sound for ravens. And he goes, Baltimore Ravens? I said, yes. You owe me $150.
Hey, there you go.
You're knowing another language in general, it just helps. Just knowing another language in general.
It does. And you're doing that interpreting thing now for realsies through that. So full circle. First look. Okay, I promise. Last question. Probably the hardest question for some. Okay. I'll be curious to see what your answer is. What is leadership to you in one word?
Today at 3:29 p.m. Perspective. I'm going to say perspective. Yeah, I think it's really important to understand perspective.
Awesome.
To be a good leader. Other people's perspective, your own perspective, the perspective of the issue at hand. I just think that's important. And other things will go with that. Like I think empathy will go in there. But I think for right now, I'm going to say perspective because I think it can do the things you're supposed to do as a leader. You know, you need to influence people. You need to be able to understand, ask the right questions. You may not always know the answers, but you got to be able to ask the right questions. And in order to do that, you got to gain some perspective.
I once wrote this little newsletter, Tisha newsletter article on the difference between perspective and perception. Basically, perspective is where you stand in relationship to the view, and perception is how you feel about the view.
Ooh.
Talk about a t-shirt idea, Judy. That's going to be your golden ticket to Shark Tank, I think.
I'm awaiting my t-shirt in the mail. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Megan-Brette. And we're just super grateful for you. So thank you.